I'm delighted to be talking to LaTanya Pattillo today. Great to meet you. And just would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Lixie. I am LaTanya Pattillo. I am a quilter and crafter in North Carolina. I have been crafting and quilting for over 22 years, since I was a teen, I will say. And I'm enjoying leaning into this next phase, which is really kind of taking on quilting and crafting head on. So thank you for having me.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, I'm just so excited to have you here. Just one of the amazing array of teachers we have for this event. Tell me about the quilt in the background, because it's very striking and I can see the quilting really well as well. So how did that happen?
Well, thank you so much. This is Crimson Crossroads, and it is a very simple quilt. It's a two-block quilt. It's a snowball quilt and a nine-patch quilt. And it was part of actually a class that I took with a Facebook group called Brown Quilters Create and Educate. And it was a challenge. We have regular classes, and it was, hey, why don't let's make this, two-color, two-block quilt. And so these are 12-inch blocks. And it was a quilt that I made for an exhibit last year. It was an earlier quilt, so I'm much better at piecing and quilting now. But it's kind of my flagship quilt, right? It is the one that let me know, hey, you can do this. You can do these larger scale quilts, right? And I love two color quilts. And I chose red and white as my first one. So I will be making more of these, but thank you for asking about it.
Oh, it's absolutely beautiful. And I know people are, so how big is it altogether, the quilt?
So believe it or not, I don't know the measurements, but it's a king size quilt, right? It's huge. It's on the wall. And so again, the first one to exhibit, it was over like, I want to say it's like 68 by 26 or so, give or take, because I added some borders and I added my flying geese and all of that. It is
Oh,
bigger than my husband, who is 6'5". So that if that gives you an idea
that
of
absolutely does.
how
So,
large it is, that's it. So I can wrap in it, and I'm a shorty.
and so was this one of your first quilts, like when you were first getting into quilting?
Well, no, so it's a relatively recent quilt, right? But it is the first, like I said, larger quilt. I've done some smaller quilts, just kind of without patterns, had a design in mind, doing some improv things, leaning into traditional quilting a little more. But this was the first one where, again, I took time. I knew I was entering it into an exhibit, right? I had folks who were going to be expecting it, so I had to step up my game a little bit. And I had to plan and prepare for it. So it was really an opportunity for me to be more intentional about my quilt creation in a way that I hadn't been before. And I have smaller quilts, all of those things, but this one was a little bit different. And this is why it's special to me.
Oh, that's awesome. So what was it that got you into quilting originally?
Yeah, so my grandmother quilted,
Oh,
and she made utilitarian quilts that were beautiful. But when we were coming up, everyone had to get one of Grandma Mabel's quilts, right? Like it was a thing. And I had a couple of her quilts when I was younger, and I was less thoughtful about how to care for those quilts.
of course,
And when I
as kids often
you
are.
know
Yeah.
Right. But when I had my children, started having children, and we have 5 children, I started crafting and quilting more. And so I did a little bit of crochet. I made crochet blankets, all of those things. But when my number 5 out of 5 was born, I did a small baby quilt and did some hand embroidery. And that has one kind of stuck with me too.
Mhm.
So recently, I just been kind of called back to quilting. I was a stay-at-home mom for a while. So that's where a lot of my crafting experience came in. I needed
Yeah.
something to do, and I did all of the things. but quilting specifically, like I said, just kept calling me back.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's in the blood with grandma quilting. Skipped a generation because none of my my mom and my aunts and uncles, none of them quilted in that way. So here I am, hopefully continuing that legacy, and then really thinking about how to make it kind of a more crafting business craft experience beyond just a hobby that I appreciate. And I lean into teaching too, which is why I'm excited about this opportunity, because I was a business teacher. But this gives me an opportunity to blend the things that I love, right? So my work, my hobby, and then, my career as an educator.
Absolutely. And I know I've heard before that these crafts often skip a generation because it's not cool to do what your parents do. Have any of your kids shown an interest?
No. No,
Yeah,
they have not. No,
it's
they are creative kids, right? And so they
mm,
express their creativity differently. They support me in, my crafting, my quilting journey. When my daughter actually thinks about sewing, but not necessarily quilting.
mm.
Um, so, we're still exploring, and I'm hopeful that at some point, I'll be able to pass this along. But if not then the grandkids when they come along. So
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
that's great. Keep the tradition going.
sure.
And of course, you don't just quilt. I know one of the other things, well, you do many other things. You mentioned crochet and so on, but one of the other things you do is dye your own fabric as well.
I do. Yes, I do. I enjoyed, again, part of the early process was figuring out, okay, what is it that I like to do? What would make me different? I kind of like thinking about the entire supply chain, if you will. So not just buying the fabric, but creating the
Mhm.
fabric, and dyeing is something that I like to be in the mood for, and I need to have space and time, right? And it needs to be the right temperature and all of those things. But again, I like using hand dyed, unique fabrics, right? It's just something about knowing that you created this textile that you are using in this piece, right? And what an opportunity it is to create something that is unique and different, that can't be replicated, no matter whether or not you use, the same dyes. It won't look the same. You won't tie it the same. It won't have the same pattern, all of those things. So I enjoy that pattern, that process very much.
Oh, yeah. No, I can see absolutely what you mean about this being having something that's truly unique to
Yeah.
yourself. Um, so we've talked a bit about your background in quilting and so on. Tell us about your workshop that you're doing.
Yeah, so piecing and planning is the workshop that I'm preparing. The goal is to think about two things, right? I want folks to come to the course thinking about, one, a quilt that they want to create or a piece that they want to create, but then also thinking about this long-term vision for what it is that you want to do as a quilter, right? So you get kind of a 2-for-1 in this course, because you're thinking about a practical way to approach another project, but also thinking about like long-term vision planning and goal reaching, right? So when I think about my experience, what has been helpful for me is, yeah, if I'm making a quilt, how do I think about, the fabrics and what my end result is going to be? And then how do I start kind of backward mapping from, you know, how do I get from point A to Z with design, with fabrics, with getting support that I need if there's a technique that I'm not sure about. Yeah, there's YouTube and all of that, which is fantastic. But I think it's important in this quilt community to have, people and individuals that you can reach out to. And so the course that I'm teaching is really to think about how you do that while you're creating this piece. But then also, if I'm thinking about LaTanya as the crafter, right, or Lixie as the crafter, right, what is the end goal? What goal do I want to reach? Do I want to be a designer, quilt designer? Do I want to make quilts for others? Do I want to dye fabrics, like all of those things. What is my end goal? For me, I call it my retirement plan. What am
Mhm.
I going to be doing in 10 years? And so how do I, again, back map and think about how I achieve that goal? So you do it in pieces and you plan it out. And depending on what that goal is, it may be daunting for some, it may be simple for others, but I hope that folks come to the course excited about what it takes to really, again, plan, set your goals, and take the journey to get there.
That's amazing. I'd never thought about planning a quilt in those terms, like how analogous it is to planning to meet any other goal, really. And I know there's lots of people, we're recording this in November, and there's the deadline for QuiltCon I think has just passed. And there have been a lot of people who have been submitting for the first time and whose goal is to get quilts into
Yeah.
QuiltCon. I've never been brave enough to even think about submitting, but
Yeah.
and then of course there's all sorts of other shows and awards and getting patents published and so on. So yeah, I think this is going to be a great workshop. I mean, I'm really looking forward to watching it myself. So yeah, I'm excited about it.
Well,
Um,
thank you for that. Yeah.
and what do you have goals yourself? Because
Yeah.
people are going to be watching this just in January, probably in 2024. Like what are your plans for the year?
Yeah. So my goals change.
Mm. I bet
I
with
do.
5 kids, you've got to be pretty
Yeah.
flexible, I guess.
Right. This was a goal, I will tell you, to really lean into teaching more.
Mhm.
Has been a goal of mine, and to figure out how I continue to go along my just creative path, but then how I transition into teaching and sharing and facilitating what I know about creating and crafting, right? But another long-term goal in my community is to have very simply a brick and mortar shop where
Awesome.
I can support crafters in the area, but build a community that is beyond my town in North Carolina, right?
Mhm.
So the way I've planned my goals is kind of short term, long term, local goals, and then national goals, right? And so all of the, even international goals, all of these things are dynamic. And so because of that, because I'm interested in so many things, I have to make sure that I am, like I said, I'm intentional about one, pausing, understanding what the steps are, and then making sure that I'm doing, planning the short term, that long term. So right now, my goal is to continue to do just what we're talking about today, which is, share what I know about crafting and creating, be a support for folks who are maybe new to quilting, right? I want to make quilting really, really accessible to
Mhm.
people. To your point about QuiltCon, right? Not being ready to submit to QuiltCon, I feel that totally, right? But I think it's important for us to be a support for those who may want to do that. And my goal has always been to just make crafting more accessible. It can
Mm.
be intimidating to see some of these magnificent quilts, right? That are that are on display, that are being accepted into competitions and such. But just like my grandmother, right? Just like these are things. These can be arts or pieces that we create just for us, just for others, and they don't have to be intimidating, and they can still very much be beautiful works, utilitarian pieces, all of the things that we want them to be. So my goal is to, and I might have said that in a million different ways, but my goal is to, again, make crafting more accessible. And then long term, have my, craft corner, my craft store that is welcoming, that is engaging, that supports crafters. And then it allows me to do a little both, have some business and then have a community and then still get my quilting and crafting itch scratched a bit.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people who will relate to that because there's so much such a big part of quilting is that community element.
Yeah.
Like you're not usually just making these things for yourself.
Right.
You've normally got like recipients and so on in mind. And I really like your point as well about like not everybody's goal is to win a ribbon at QuiltCon or something. Like some people just they want to gift these things, like your grandmother, they want to give these things to your children. And I always have said to people that one of the best things after you've given someone a quilt is to come back a year or two later and it's all like tattered and stained and stuff because they've just used it. You know,
Yeah.
they haven't worried about it. They've just really enjoyed using it.
Sure.
So obviously your grandmother was a big influence, but who are some other inspirations within the
Yeah.
quilting community?
Yeah. So I'll give you some specifics and then I'll just give a general statement about
Mm,
quilting. But two quilters that I really value, well, three that I really value and appreciate for a number of reasons. Um, so Faith Ringgold, who is an author, who is a quilter, who is a painter. I first came into my connection to Faith Ringgold was reading her book Tar Beach when I worked at an elementary school in a media center.
mhm.
She does these fantastic picture quilts, and where she paints and then she quilts, and it's scenarios around, the Black community, African American community. She's from New York, from Harlem, and so a lot of her quilts are about the Black experience, the civil rights experience. And she was the first one to me, to that I looked at that was in literature, right? Because they were writing books, and she wrote a book based on her quilt, this little Black girl in Tar Beach, which was the top of her apartment building. That's what Tar Beach was, right?
Oh,
Um,
I haven't heard of this. I'm gonna have to look this book up. That
yeah,
sounds
you
amazing.
have to look it up. It's a lovely, lovely book. And so just I appreciated the mixed methods that she used. I am not a painter. And I was always like, well, how did she create that and quilt it? Well, she's a painter, she's an artist, and then she quilted and then created these books. So she was a first example to me of how you can do many things and how they would translate into or end up being a quilt, and in her case, like art quilts.
Mhm.
Um, so she's been around for a long time. The next quilter that is an inspiration is Bisa Butler.
Oh,
Um, are you familiar with Bisa?
yeah, absolutely. Amazing
Right.
work.
Amazing, amazing quilter. And her quilts, again, are made of imagery. And it is this, what happens when you go beyond, a background of white, right? When you use fabrics that are not white, when you're using these floral fabrics, when you are creating or replicating these startling images, again, of the Black and Brown experience. And I love that we are about the same age,
Mm.
um, and that her work is becoming more accepted, right? She's in the Smithsonian, increasing the audience around quilting and textiles. And the third one is Dr. Carolyn Mazlumi,
Mhm.
who is a quilter and a quilt collector who has for many years has been expanding the exposure of quilters and all across the country and internationally. And I'm not doing them any justice with my description, but I would say, if folks are not familiar with them, to kind of take a look at their work and how they not only elevate or continue to elevate the work of quilters in the space, but what it means to kind of cultivate community, and be their authentic artistic self, as it connects to quilters. So those are three very specific examples of inspiration. But because of this issue of access, right, there are quilters out there that inspire me that I can't even name, right?
Yeah.
There are people in these Facebook groups and on Instagram that are just really jumping into the medium and are taking the chance, right? Or saying, this is what I love, this is what I do. There are, again, folks who don't even want to be who don't want to be necessarily quilt celebrities, but are supporting each other, but are sharing their expertise. Part of the reason I was able to do Crimson Crossroads is because someone reached out to me and said, do you want to be in this exhibit? And they inspire me. So I look up to a lot of people, a lot of people in the quilting industry.
Absolutely. And I get what you mean, like on Facebook and especially on Instagram, like you especially if someone's not got their own name as their tag, like you've got no idea really of who made this. You just know that it's amazing and it's inspiring. So yeah,
Sure.
all of that sharing is extraordinary. Okay, well, I think we're almost through the interview, but I just wanted to ask, like, are there any quilts that are kind of on your bucket list that you have been meaning to get around to? I know for me, cathedral window is a technique that I've never tried, and it looks very fiddly, but every year I'm like, this is going to be the year that I'll try that one. But what about for you? Like, what do you think is going to be your next challenges?
Yeah, that is such an interesting question. And I don't know if there is one
Oh
that is
yeah.
on my list, which is because I'm always like the squirrel where like you see something and it's like, oh, that would be interesting. Let me get ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
I do like improv quilts.
Mm.
And so I've leaned into improv curves. I think um, that just as a skill, just being able to take what you have and, you know, make it into something, I
Mm.
think is just kind of a direction in which I like to head into. I see a variety of quilts all the time that I love, like Flying Geese is my favorite block. I love paper piecing. I also love the traditional blocks. I'm trying to complete my Underground Railroad quilt as as we speak. But I think when I think about like what my goal, what's on my bucket list, right? It
Mm.
really is to lean more into the improv technique, um, and then maybe submit something maybe submit to a competition. I'll go with that.
Oh wow. Well, that's a great goal to have. And yeah, and I feel like that leaves you free to
Mhm.
react as you wish to as things come
Mhm.
up. So that's awesome.
Thank
All right.
you.
Well, thank you so much for this. I'm going to make sure that there are links to the three artists you mentioned
Sure.
with your interview. And of course, there's all your links and information is on your Meet the Teacher page,
Yes.
which I'll link to as well. But it's been fascinating and awesome talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to Quilt 2024 and hope to see folks on the call and stay connected. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.